everybody, to the Living Heritage Museum's History for Lunch. My name is Brett King. I'm the Executive Director. Just wanted to welcome everyone and thank you so much for coming. Today's program is from Ms. Carolyn Ritchey, originally from what used to be Monroe County when it was big, and then they broke it up in 1870. It's now Loudoun County. 8th generation Tennessean, going back to the Revolution. So y'all didn't come here to hear me talk, but I'll just want to thank you very much for coming and sharing this, all the work that you've done with the book, and we're looking forward to the program. So,
well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Jane.
Thank you, guys. Golly, Ned, I'm just a plain old country girl with a story to tell, and I taught 2nd grade, and I never did get above that intellect. I've got another 2nd grade teacher over here. So I want to thank you for your invitation to be here and for your desire to come and hear what I have to say, and I hope you leave today going, well, I think that might have been worth leaving the house for. So I hope you can glean something from today's visit. Anyway, the story is so long and has so many tangles to it that I've had to, unfortunately, have some notes. So bear with me with that. And I've also ventured into the land of using this. That's something new for me too, so that's a learning experience. But in order to understand my book, which is a miracle, because I never planned on writing a book, ever. I wasn't going to write a book. That just never crossed my path. And here it is, lo and behold. So in order to understand this big old thing, I think we're going to turn the clock back. And we're going to go back 60 years. And we're going to have to dip into a little bit of Loudoun County history that turned into a national story and still continues today. And that way you'll better understand, well, maybe why I wrote this book and where it fits into the scheme of the Tellico Dam story. Tellico Dam itself was long and it was complicated, very complicated. It had lots of special interests groups that joined in, and each special interest group made a twist or a turn in the path of the project. And they became so intertwined and wound together like a rope that you can't tell just one tangent of the story because they're that overlapping, they're that connected. So during this long process, it was 20 years, all the 1960s and all of the 1970s. So this is 2 decades. There are 5 United States presidents, some having a little bit more to do with the project than others. There were 6 Tennessee governors. Now, really there were only 5, but there were 6 elections. It was Ellington, Clement, Ellington, Dunn, Blanton, and then Alexander. And the presidents were Kennedy, and then Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter. So there's only one of those political heads that stood for the river and stood for the Darter. Only one. That's a poor percentage, isn't it? So I'm going to see if I can figure this out here. The Tellico Dam project covered 38,000 acres. 38,000, and it was going to inundate. This map is a better one, but it's too far away for you to see. And right down here is Chilhowie. And this little ziggity line here, this is Von Orr, right along in here. And then we travel down. This is Jackson Bend. This is where my story takes place. And then Coy Spring, which is, I don't know, wrong in here, it's on the 7-mile marker. And then we go down to Bustle Island. Here's the proposed dam. And then you already have Fort Loudoun Dam. So this was the last 33 free-flowing mile of the Little Tennessee River that was left. Of this miles of acres here, there were going to be 16,000 was going to be reservoir. That left 22,000 extra acres in the possession of TVA. More about that in a minute. A closer look at these acres, and a TVA downplayed this, but it's in the transcript in the oversight hearings back in I think this one was 78, when Mama spoke before the Senate House hearings, or I think that was the Senate. She spoke in the Senate and the House, and that's the transcript from everybody that spoke. But at that, it was brought out that of this acreage, 15,500 acres were Class 1, Class 2, high-quality farmland with some of the topsoil being 15 feet deep. Just absorb that. That is some rich land. 10,000 of these acres were Class 3, nothing to snuff at because a farmer can make a living on that. 12,500 acres were Class 4 and 5, pasture, gotta have pasture, and woodland, gotta have that too. Now, most of the high quality land that I spoke of, that's what's covered up. That's what's underwater. And of this 38,000 acre stretch, supposedly there's 750 deed holders that had properties that TVA had to approach and deal with. 58 of these were so-called federal condemnations through the use of eminent domain. And more about that in a minute too. Now there were farmers that were affected, and their numbers that have been given by TVA's archives are around 348 farm families, and we're talking about dairy, hog, poultry, beef, tobacco, row crop, truck patch, all kinds of farmers. And these farmers are putting right back into the economy through tractor dealerships, through their local co-ops. So they're producing, and their land is taken. Now the average for the taken of this land from 67 when TVA started taking the land all the way to 75 when the last property was taken was $356 an acre. That's the average throughout the whole project. Now TVA will stand here toe to toe with me and say the farmer and the landowner was justly compensated. They were not. How do I know they were not? Because in the late 60s, we know a farmer who sold his farm to another farmer. He paid $1,000 an acre. Does that sound like just payment to you? But TVA will stand here and tell you it was just payment. Now, a little bit more about this little Tennessee River. The poor little thing is just about 133 miles long. It starts in North Georgia and flows backward. It goes north, which is up into North Carolina, makes a big old 90-degree turn, and graces East Tennessee with its beauty. And this poor little river has 5 dams on it. It has Fontana, Chiowa, Calderwood, Chilhowie, and Tellico was going to make number 5. It was going to make the 3rd dam in Loudoun County. Loudoun County already had, on the Big Tennessee River, Fort Loudoun Dam, operational in 43. It had on the Clinch River, Melton Hill, operational in 63. Then it was going to have on the Little Tennessee River, Tellico, which would be operational in 79 eventually. So that was 3 waterways and 3 reservoirs. Well, wait a minute. It's got a 4th reservoir. How does it have a 4th reservoir without a dam? Well, when they backed up the Big Tennessee River at the Ray-Meigs County line, what's barred? That backed into Loudoun County, and my own grandpa had a business. He had a milling business, flour mill, and it backed in when it was my mama's family. And when that backed into the Pond Creek, it ruined the mill race. So my mama was already moved from TVA at one time. So it's going to make 3 dams and 4 reservoirs. Now you're going to say, that's a lot. Yeah, it is a lot, because if you look at the 95 counties in Tennessee, in land mass, the Loudoun County is number 85 in size. So there's only 10 counties less than it. And I looked up McMinn, and I think McMinn is number 53 in size, if I looked at it correctly. And in 1979, the Tennessee State Planning Council published an article in the Loudoun County paper that said TVA owned or controlled 14% of the property in Loudoun County at the time. Now, what do you think that does to a tax base? Does a lot, doesn't it? Ruins it pretty much. Now I want to, pushed the wrong one. I want to address these 22,000 extra acres taken by the agency. TVA already had a series of dams, and look at these. Oh, where is that little dot? Oh, there. Whoop. Up.
It's on this one.
There it is. Anyway, all those little red dots, represent their dams. They've already got over 60. Can you imagine that? Well, in East Tennessee alone, you can see how jam-packed we are. There are already 29 hydro dams in East Tennessee. And the last one of those was up and operational in '67, and that's Nickajack, right down below Chattanooga. Now, recognizing that TVA would eventually run out of waterways, because, I mean, that's a lot of dams, Aubrey Wagner was the driving force in this whole dam business for TVA. He and his project wizards, is what we like to call them, decided that they were going to have to come up with a new plan of the way to build dams, because the old standards of building all these dams using hydropower, flood control, and navigation, they couldn't use that anymore. They'd harnessed all the powerful rivers. They were going to go to these tributaries, and they couldn't use those standards. So they came up with, well, first of all, maybe I should tell you, Aubrey Wagner contacted some dam engineers that were the Midwestern group, and they came in and they met down there at Watts Bar at their wheelhouse, and they planned in the 50s, late 50s, all these ways of how they could come up with a benefit cost ratio for Teleco, because they had all those others, you know, it was just like clockwork, picking out because it was those old standards and they knew how to do it. This was a new bear in the house, and they had to figure out how to control this bear. So Wagner was going to use Teleco as a showcase. It was going to be the showcase for TVA's new era of building dams. And he was going to use these new standards. And these new standards were going to be residential, recreational, and industrial. And he was going to propose it to be a multi-purpose project. Well, an effort to reach a benefit cost ratio that was worth a hoot was a headache from the get-go. And according to the TVA's own archives, they never reached one. When they presented it to Congress, it was inflated, but it was never checked. They never questioned it, because TVA is a branch of the government. So the other branches of government didn't check that branch of government. But if it had been checked at the beginning, it would have never passed. It was weak as water. So the engineers never came up with one. So they had to claim on this 22,000 extra acres, it was like grabbing at cotton candy. They had to claim any future benefits that they could come up with, future development that they could conjure that might someday bring in money, and that's where they were going to get their benefits, from money that they were just dreaming on. Does that make sense to you all? It wasn't anything concrete. It was anything that they thought might be a future sale, way off in the distance, and then they were going to use that. So it was just a bunch of made up nothing, is what it really was. So they took the land from private ownership with the threat of eminent domain, and they planned to resell it at the highest dollar that they could get for it. That was their plan. Now, Wagner knew there was going to be pushback. Now, you're going to say, where am I getting all this? Is she just making all this up? No, I'm not. This is from TVA's own archives. I am surprised that they let a book be published that told their own shenanigans. So Wagner knew that from the previous dams that had been built, there hadn't been a great big excessive land take like this beyond the reservoir. So he was going to come up with all these little things that he was going to have in position, and he could just wheel them out on his little dolly and put them when he wanted them to go to work. So in the 50s, he and his little gurus, his little clan from out west that he pulled in here, they decided to come up with things, and he was going to control public opinion, and he was going to keep the public confused. Imagine that. Does that sound like something that we might be living today? Well, in the late 50s, old Wagner and his bunch, and these are just a few of the ones I'm going to tell you, they had all this in line before their 1963 trip to Washington to say we're ready to ask for funding, because they knew that there was going to be local pushback. One of the things they were going to do is they were going to go into the 3 counties affected, Monroe, Blount, and Loudoun, and they were going to form semi-private groups within these counties. They were going to plant their own employees in there. And those employees were going to go out into the lower legal, the lower controlling groups like the local mayors, the councilmen, the aldermen, and they were going to lure them in and tell them how much money they were going to shuffle into their little hamlet. And they were going to get, they thought, lots of support that way, and they would be able to control public opinion. Oh, why wouldn't anybody want this? They're going to bring money into our area. That was one way. Another way they were going to keep everybody confused, they were just going to lie. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. They lied. And I know a specific one I can share with you. There was a family in Greenback who wrote a letter to Congressman John Duncan Sr. All my things are, I won't say senior every time, but it was the old congressman, not this other one, not his son. And they wrote him asking if they could keep their land they farmed. And so he writes back this eloquent letter, I have a copy of it, that says, oh no, this is just a future proposal. We're just thinking about it. It's much more advantageous to be left farmland. A month later, I have an article that was published in the paper. He is the head leader of a group that has gone to Washington and is saying, oh, this area is depressed and we need this down. So he's telling the public down here one thing, and doggone it, he's telling Washington something else. Washington doesn't know what's going on down here. So that's the example of lying. Alrighty, now how they pulled this off, I don't know, but how they pulled any of it off, I don't know. If you wrote a letter, and Mama wrote countless letters. Mama was a very intelligent lady, and I didn't realize that until I got to be an old woman myself, of how smart she really was. She knew political ways. She read a lot, and she knew how senators and congressmen voted, and she knew their pet rocks, and she knew which way to approach them when she wrote. But when she wrote Senator Bill Brock, originally from Chattanooga, she asked him how TVA was in the real estate business and how they could use eminent domain and take our farm and resell it so somebody else could live there. Well, Bill Brock writes us, Mama, back and says, I'm checking into this for you. Well, in the meantime, we don't know this, Bill Brock sends his letter to Aubrey Wagner. And Aubrey Wagner comes up with whatever, a big old long letter, signs it Red. That was his nickname, Red Wagner. So he sends that back to Brock. Then Brock includes that letter. I have the original, it's signed by Red Wagner. Back to Mama. Well, I want you to know, Mama was fit to be tied. If she could have bit a 10-penny nail in two, she'd have bit it. And I want to read just an excerpt from her letter. This is her letter. From your reply to me, an enclosed letter from the chief mogul, known to you as Red, I have come to these conclusions. Number one, you think your hands are tied and you're unwilling to help us. Two, you've fallen victim to TVA's superb methods of congressman brainwashing tactics. Three, you're admitting that TVA is greater and has more power than the federal government. Four, you're blind to a citizen's plea for help, one who is in danger of becoming a victim of an organization that considers this area their own private playpen to manipulate as it so desires. As I view the unbridled tactics of TVA under the strict regimentation of a supervision of its chairman, I can very well see a strong resemblance to another strong chairman, Mao of China, who has a master plan for a whole nation with its vast numbers of bland humanity who sit by mutely, while you and others like you sit by meekly, failing to see the forest for the trees. TVA goes on methodically cutting up the citizens of this area for fish bait for its pools. So she had a way with words, and she should have written this book, but she refused. And so I figured, well, by doggies, it's got to be written, so I did it. All right, that's one example. Another one was she wrote President Ford. And Lynn Sieber, who was with TVA, I don't know exactly what position he had at that time, but it was upper echelon area, he answered. So we never heard from President Ford. So then So if you wrote a letter, you got no help. That's what happened to you. So then in 65, William O. Douglas comes down, falls in love with the river, does a little fly fishing, does a little meeting and greeting. And this is at Chota up here, where he meets this band of Cherokee, has a collection, a petition of names of people who want to save the river. He says he's going to write this grand article for the National Geographic. You know, that was the place to put articles because that was the scientific magazine that everybody liked. So, again, Aubrey Wagner gets wind of this. He can't stake any anybody wanting to save the river. That won't do. So he flies himself up there to the magazine, talks to the editor. I don't know exactly what he says, but the article was never published. It was later published, this was in 65, it was later published in 69 in a gentleman's magazine named True. And since then, we had never read the article, but since somebody read the book and they went on eBay, the magazine, and they bought it for me. And it's got beautiful pictures. Anyway, and then another way that old Mr. Aubrey Wagner was going to control everything is he had his good friend Marguerite Owen, and she was the TVA director of the TVA office in Washington, D.C. So she was going to smooth over and snoop around and find out what he needed. So I ask you wholeheartedly, does this sound like a dam that was needed with all these hidden agendas? Or does it sound like an obsolete work project that's pushed down the throats of all of us who lived in the valley? We who lived in the valley called it communistic, and it was illegal, and it was no more than a land grab. And that's what we think. So, all of what I've shared up to you today is from the TVA archives. And I am amazed that they let Wheeler and McDonald, two UT professors, write this book. But as they were writing the book, it's called TVA and the Tellico Dam, 1936 to 1979. Both authors now have passed away. But while they were writing it, they made note and said there were paralegals on site, and they were pulling files right and left and saying, oh, the public don't need to know this. They don't need to know everything. So that we don't get the whole story, but we got enough to know all Mama's and Daddy's suspicions of where they thought this and they really believed this. They were held true in that book. So this is what my family, oh, I always push that wrong one. This is what my family, this is, no, I never can. Whoa, doggies, what did I do? Oh, there it is. Sorry. This is me. Am I not a cocky looking thing? This is my sister that passed away in 2015. She's all the time trying to control me and make me be more ladylike, and I was just a bull in the wood. This is Mary Ann, who's sitting, did I introduce my sister, Mary Ann, over here? This is Mama and Daddy, and this is our brother. And so there's only 3 people left to tell their story, and that's Mary Ann, me, and my brother. And then this is Mama and Daddy over here. So this is what my family of 6 were dropped into. All these shenanigans. And I would like to go through quickly because I know I can get long-winded and I have too much to tell y'all. But I wanted to share with you, TVA made fun of our home because we had never painted it and it had a rusty roof. It wasn't a Sequoia Hills house, and they made all kinds of fun, and they thought that we were horrible. This is the view that we had, and right over here is we just had those little point and shoot, but that's the Smoky Mountains. This is the sidewalk that was, we can see how this is Fort Creek Road, how close we were to the road. And then this was, we had a circle drive, 2 barns, and when you're farm kids, where do you have your pictures made? Why do you climb on the latest tractor and you have your pictures made? So there we are, and here we are. This is my sisters and brother, and this is Fort Creek Valley. Our house is right here. And then you can see all the way down the valley. It was beautiful. This is Fort Creek, and we did have a creek that was on the borderline of our farm, and that did back up about 3 acres on a very steep, you can see how steep it is over here on the left. And so Daddy didn't farm that anyway, and he didn't let the cows go down there, so we could still be there today, but we're not. This was the back view. We always call that the cherry tree field. That's our neighbors. That's another view. And mind you, all this is covered in houses now. This is not underwater, houses. And that there was the North Butler case, the Supreme Court case. See this? This is a mature redwood, not redwood, hardwood woods. It's mostly red and white oak, and some hickory, and a little bit of cherry. And TVA cruised that, but you cannot count the value of your woods with the value and include it with the value of your farm. So they stole our trees. Plain and simple. Daddy grew up right over there. This is our farm here, so you can see that it was where we were. This is some pretty dogwoods we had. We were, again, farm kids. We had 2 sets of twins. Here we named everything. And they were all halter trained. Daddy taught us how to make those halters. And then, of course, she was a very big, important part of our family. That's Starry. She was our family milk cow. And, of course, we drank raw milk. I guess that's why we're mean today. And we had Betsy. I raised her from a calf. And we had Speedy, slowest 10-year itch. And that's Marianne and Mama setting tobacco. And then we got tobacco ready for harvest there. Or go to the barn. We grew beans. This is just some farm scenes that you can show we did farm, and these are just, we had some Hereford cattle. They were all named. You could go out the back door and holler, "Apple Annie!" And she'd go, "Whoa!" So we had a good time with our cows. This is shelling corn. I mean, we worked. We also tried to save our community. It was called Jackson, and this was a mill right here, a Burton Mill. There was a blacksmith shop. This is the school that we went to. Right over here, hidden behind those trees, is an old country store. And so we were trying to save our community. That's again the mill. Daddy went to school here. His brothers and sisters did. Marion and Sally graduated from there. I was in the 6th grade when TVA came along. And I had to close the school, and they tore it down, and I cried like a baby, and I've not been the same since. I couldn't go to my sweet little Jackson school. This looks similar to a Cades Cove church to me, and that's where my great-granddaddy helped build that, and that's where we were members forever. It was a little Methodist church. It was torn down. It is underwater. This was the store that you couldn't see a minute ago. You can see here that the steeple at Fort Creek has already been taken off. This is the only church that actually had a cemetery, so they dug these people up and moved them to the new location for the church, which is on the new 72. And I would dodge. I was going to UT at the time, and I would dodge these odd-colored clods of dirt because I thought I was running over somebody's remains. And then this was another little church. This was in the community right up here. On this would have been a great. I'll show you what's going to be up there. It's the Charles H. Bacon home. He had about 1,500 acres of land. This is the old 72, which is mostly underwater. There are sections. You can see this beautiful fence. This Charles H. Bacon died the year I was born in 55, so I never knew him, but he had clout, and some said that if he had lived, there would have never been a dam. This is his home. He had Hewlett-Packards, he had a driver, beautiful, beautiful house. This was the back of it. This particular farm had 871 acres. This was what they called the upper place. Daddy farmed there and did a whole lot of their custom work there, and then the other farm was at Maple Hill, and that's where the Chody Yacht Club is down on that end, and it had 600 and some odd acres. This is what happened to it. Hoodlums ransacked it. And then these barns remind me of the Mayfield's barns, the ones here in Athens. Beautiful, beautiful barns, and they're all gone, and that's all underwater. So that's what we're trying to save. So that gives you an idea and maybe brings it a little closer of our fight. That shows you where we are and what we're looking at. And so TVA prevented landowners from joining on like a road. If they started here and they may appraise at this place on Fort Creek Road, well, the next day they may be up near Chilhowie. So it was like a divide and conquer. They ditched and they dodged. They never had a methodical way. So that kept farmers to some extent, even though we did clan together and had the Association for the Preservation of the Little Tennessee River. Doesn't that sound like something Scarlett O'Hara would say on the porch of Tara when she's out there saying that you need to join the group? And then there were 2 other groups that we joined as well that were farm groups. So TVA ran their roads like they had their own private Arab oil well. They were everywhere. TVA land buyers, and when I can speak from experience, were bullies. They were trained to be bullies. They used intimidation, they used manipulation and coercion when they approached the farmer or the landowner. They were arrogant. and acted like they were doing you a favor by coming to save you. They knew better how to run your own affairs than you did. You needed to be saved. They did not like the word no, and they got no from Daddy and Mama a lot. Because after all, you needed to be saved. It was terrible the way the landowners were treated. The most vulnerable people in our neck of the woods was approached first. I'm talking about the people who were sickly, the people who were old. Our own neighbor came to us and said, you know, that TVA land buyer came to ask all about you. He wanted to know if you made any money a farming, if you was in debt. He wanted to know if you were a sickly person. Wanted to know if you was a good farmer. Wanted to know if I thought you'd sign and sell, or if you'd be one of them that wanted to fight. So our own neighbor told us that. So they, when the land buyers came, they would tell Mom and Daddy, oh, you can't fight TVA. They planted this picture in your head that was like you're already beat before you even take the next breath. You can't fight the TVA. They got all kinds of money. They got all kinds of power. They got all kinds of lawyers. And you're going to have to go in debt. You're going to have, if you fight, you're going to be out some money. They're hitting you in the pocketbook. And then you might go through the 3-man 2-day commission thing, and you might make less. So you might as well just sign on this dotted line. So they were trying to twist your arm into just throwing your hands up. And a lot of the landowners did, because they didn't have that extra money to go in debt, maybe, or to reach back and pull out more money to fight it. And then they'd slap you with this. You can go through all that, but they're going to slap eminent domain on it, and they're going to take it anyway. So you were given this defeated atmosphere. You can't fight it. So if a farmer let the appraiser come on, then they would appraise. They'd bring you the appraisal. The farmer had not one word of any value. He couldn't put any value into the worth of what their appraisal was. It was their number they came up with, and that was it. You didn't even get and who in here is going to sell their car without saying, well, that car is worth more than that. I'm not selling that to you. Or your home. You want some input into it. You want to have a say. So, and then when you were given that, you had 20 days. 20 days to decide, well, am I going to sign this and tuck my tail between my legs and go over here and lick my wounds and buy some little old lot because that's all I'm going to have money for? Or am I going to have to fight, or am I going to fight this thing? 20 days is all they gave you. So, when they came to our place, Mom and Daddy said, the place is miles from the dam. It'll never be underwater. It's not right that they can take ours by eminent domain and resell it and let somebody else live here. That's just not American. So Mom and Daddy, we were not rich by any means. We were farmers, dirt farmers, row crop farmers, with 4 kids having to raise. So Mom and Daddy stood on principle. Tom Jester was the first one. Now the dam started in 67. They started taking land in 67, but they didn't approach us until 1969, March. A man by the name of Tom Jester came. He was there for the American government, and he was going to praise for TVA, for the Tellico Dam. Daddy said no, put him in the road. He came back within 2 weeks, same speech. Daddy said no. Well, I want you all to know that we were not approached. The rest of 1969, 1970, 1971, 1972, 1973. They never darkened our door. But all around us in this beautiful little community called Jackson, and all of our farm neighbors, we saw our grandpa, they bought half of his farm. He got to keep his house and so many acres. My great uncle, his was taken. Farm neighbors would load their cattle and leave. They chose not to fight. Barns were torn down. Creeks were raped of any vegetation. And we saw our lovely, beautiful home area look like a war zone in that period of time. And I will have to say that, I'll go back just a minute to Governor Dunn. He is the only one that stood up in the political arena and wanted to save the river. He wanted it to be saved for its Cherokee historical richness and the valley richness from other historical perspectives, and he wanted to put it on the scenic rivers list. And so this is in 73. I'm in this picture, but I'm not in it. This is Mama right here, grinning like a Cheshire cat, and because she got to chaperone my senior class over to the Capitol building, and we got to meet Governor Dunn. She has on her Save the Little T button right here. Right here it is today. So it's very old, antique. And so about this same time, this little critter is discovered at Coyote Spring in August of 73. Now talk about a twist and a turn and another whole story. In fact, it's had a whole book written on it, at least one, anyway, more than that. So appraisers returned in 74 with a vengeance, but Tom Jester never came back because he failed his mission. So it was Phillips and Pruitt this time. They came as a pair, and they came throughout that year, on and off all year. And Daddy said, no, you can't come on. Well, in December of 74, we were slapped federal condemnation papers, and that's what these are. Here we're getting ready to go down on our neighbor to get a cedar tree for Christmas tree, and here we have this. This is our boundary of our farm, 119 acres. Our house and barns was here. Here's that little stretch of Fort Creek right here. And this is a little thing called Declaration of Taking. They took our name out of the courthouse and put their name on it. They told us we no longer owned it. Our property belonged to the United States government. And we were given those 20 days. Now that is a gut hit. You're farming, making your living, and all of a sudden your land isn't yours. That hurts. The appraisal that they gave us was made from the road, because Fort Creek Road, you could see our farm from both sides of the road. It split part of the farm. And so that's where they got their appraisal. Well, here we are. Mom and Daddy said, by George, they lived through the Depression, both of them. And if you lived through the Depression, I reckon you could fight a circle saw. They said, we are not budging, we're going to fight. So by the end of December, they had hired a lawyer out of Russellville, Kentucky, because Tennessee state man wouldn't have it because they was dealing with the TVA, and you mess with them. So we had an attorney. January of 75 rolls around, and the land buyers return. Now here we are condemned. They say the land isn't ours anymore. And by the way, we were given an eviction deadline. They told us we had to be out December of 74. We lived right on through it. Mom and Daddy said, well, we grew up without electricity. By George, we'll teach you kids how to do it. Well, you'll just have to learn what we did. So even though we're federally condemned, Daddy tells them, no, you cannot come on the property. Now, I call that backbone. Shortly after this, we were notified that the appraisers would come back, and this time they would come with federal marshals. And they would secure an appraisal. I was there that day. I was going to Hiawassee at the time, but I didn't have a class that day. And so I was there when the federal marshals rolled up. There were so-called independent appraisers hired by TVA, and their appraisers, independent appraisers, there were federal marshals, and their chief condemnation attorney, which was Beverly Burbidge, a man, Beverly. I always thought that was odd. I always thought Beverly was a girl's name, but anyway, that's just my opinion. And then, so true to their word, they said that. And there was something called a writ of assistance, and it pretty much said, the federal marshals are here and they're going to secure this appraisal, and if you interfere, you're going to be getting in their little squad car over here and be hauled off. And if you behave, you can stay and participate. Well, we didn't want to go to jail, so we were appraised under duress, and we followed them around like coon dogs, and we went every step they did, and they made degrading remarks about our house. They knocked on the walls like they thought the house was going to fall down. And then shortly after that, you can see how they go to the courthouse. And this is published in the paper. So to any non-connected person, they'd go, oh, I see, the Ritcheys have sold. Well, no, the Ritcheys didn't sell. It was stolen. And they just put their name on it. So shortly after this, Mama writes Congressman John Duncan and regarding to the agency's forceful taking and a reselling of the land. So again, I don't know, I want to showcase Mama because by George, she is something else. She writes Congressman Duncan and she says, can TVA expand the right of eminent domain to take the remainder of our place and resell it for a profit to finance this questionable teleco project? By TVA's own admission, the project will not increase electricity output and the flood control is minimal, if any. Their authority syndrome has led them to believe that they can do anything they want. We farm for a living. In addition to our land, we rent nearly 300 additional acres near our home. So we spend 99 and 44/100% of our time working, tending our affairs, keeping the wolves from the door, and TVA from our door as well. I have found that you don't have to go to outer Mongolia to fight for freedom. My family, all registered voters, are waiting and watching to see the outcome of the clash between the Interior Department and TVA over the Endangered Species Act and the snow darter. Is there really a double standard in this country? One to be defied by and upheld, one which is to be defied by certain elements and obeyed by others? Which Constitution did you promise to obey and uphold when you became a congressman? Was it the modern version that stretches over everything like an 18-hour girdle? You got to be so old to know what an 18-hour girdle is. The one that misuses the right of eminent domain so flagrantly and allows federal judges to replace 12-man juries with 3-man commissioners? Or is it the ribbed version that stood on as a cornerstone for our once great republic, the one signed by Jefferson and Franklin and Hancock and other great patriots? So she gets him told. I think her frustration and her, she puts it in these letters and she vents through this. So for the next year, after we had our forced appraisal in 75, we spent a year getting ready for our 2-day 3-man commission hearing, which was held May of 76. I was there for that too. I was there for all that major stuff. The hearing was degrading. It was insulting. It was in the federal post office in downtown Knoxville in the basement with these artificial lights with no windows, and there we sat. And it was terrible. All they wanted was yes, no answers. When they were put on the stand, there were no explanations, and you can't answer everything with a yes or a no. Sometimes it's like, yes, and this is why this is a yes. That needs to be told. That was knocked down every time. We were awarded a tad more by the commissioners, but each one of TVA's appraisers lowered it by $10,000 to $13,000. So they lowered it that much. I guess they were trying to pay us back for fighting them. I don't know. Judge Taylor, who was the federal judge of the district here in the Knoxville area, refused our retrial. We asked for a retrial. Judge Taylor said no retrial. He was in TVA's back pocket. And so we were given another deadline to evacuate, to leave. And that was December of 76. And this time our power and our phone services were going to be cut. And so the litigation for the darter was going on at that time, so we had our attorney, we had 2 attorneys. This is W.P. Boone Daughtery, who was very instrumental in fighting and helping save with the darter. Some of you may have heard of him. Yeah. He read the book and wrote me a letter. I thought he was going to sue me for using his name all in here without permission, but he liked the book. So anyway, he's 87 or 88 now, I think. So about this time, we have him write an injunction to Judge Taylor asking us to keep our power and lights. And then he says, since it's under litigation, there's no need to push these people out right now. So that's how that worked. So Mom and Daddy had to go before Taylor for that. And Mama writes a huge, long, and it's all included in my book, detailed letter. And she writes it about the trial. And she sends it to Margaret Ellen and Miss Nell McCall. Asa had already passed away at the time. And she's trying to help them prepare better for their 3-man commission hearing that's coming up in a couple of months. So she wants to fill them in on everything that went on. So I wanted to read just how she starts it. TVA knows we're fighters, and they're attempting to make examples of us. Please excuse my spelling. I haven't gotten completely simmered down yet. This is a place for Weight Watchers. I've lost 5 pounds in 2 days, but I'll survive. I've come to the conclusion that if we as a whole ever go totally communistic, I will, no doubt, be stood in the front line of the 1st Firing Squad. And then she continues her letter. Mama wrote Bill Jenkins. Now, Bill Jenkins was one of the board of directors for TVA at this same period of time. And she tells him, this TVA offer is ridiculous. We cannot replace ourselves. And we will not go in debt and be put in debt by our own federal government. This is ridiculous. So he, from her letter, which I think I have it in the book, he invites us to come up to his TVA towers. So we go up, and she tells him more. Well, he assigns a TVA employee named Luke Lakey. Luke Lakey is a land buyer for TVA. He pulls him off of his regular, whatever it is, wherever he's going, and says, here, go to the surrounding counties and find these people a comparable farm for the money that TVA is offering. Luke Lakey does that for about 4 to 5 weeks. He is told by all these counties, if you can find farmland that's comparable to what you're describing for that kind of money, we'll pay you a commission. He was pulled from the job. So TVA knew we weren't being compensated. Their own employee couldn't figure it out. So he says such a farm doesn't exist. Well, during our dealings with TVA and the hearing, we were stereotyped as being uneducated. You know, we were farmers. Farmers are dumb, aren't they? That's what the city folks seemed to think back in the 1970s, and that we were backward, and that we were on the lower end of the social scale. You know, we went around dirty because we worked, and our house wasn't painted, and it had a rusty roof because everything you make goes back into that next nice piece of equipment. I mean, Daddy had some nice John Deere equipment, but the house didn't look too good, but we were happy there, and that's all that mattered. And so Chapter 7 details in detail the 2-day 3-man commission hearing. We had to pay $750 back in the 70s for the 4 transcripts. So it's very true. That everything in this book is documented because we, due to Mama's work, we kept everything. And she was very good about labeling it, dating it. So my family resisted at every turn, but we did everything legal. We weren't the ones putting sugar in their dozers, in their tanks. We weren't the ones doing pipe bombs. We weren't those people. We always felt you could go through the channels and do it right. We lobbied in Washington, and we didn't go any. We went to Cades Cove once every 10 years. We were on vacation, and we just drove around it. But so to go to Washington was a huge deal for Mama, and it was just like, oh yeah, I'll cook supper, and we'll feed the cows, and I'll milk the cow. You, Mama, go. I mean, it was just like, you know, we were cheering her on. She went 6 times. Marianne and I went twice, and we drove up once, and I followed this man, and he was a truck driver. And law help, I thought, we went at night, and I thought, I am following some rank stranger. I don't know where I'm going to end up, because he took off like a haint, and I wasn't used to this little country roads. Anyway, we lobbied in Washington. She spoke twice before the Senate House hearings in 77 and 78, and on behalf of the farmer. She wrote more letters than we did, but she wrote the majority of them. We pulled up a campaign, postcard campaign. We did interviews anytime we could. We collected petitions. We did everything we knew to do. The Supreme Court sided with the darter. Remember that little darter that I said was going to cause a twist? Well, it did, and most people today, when they mention Tellico Dam, oh, I remember that little old fish. And that's all they don't remember the farmer. They don't remember anything but the little fish. And then they'll throw off on it and talk about how ridiculous it was, but it wasn't. So the Supreme Court sided with the darter in 78. We thought we were saved. We thought, it's probably the best breath bear we had in a long time. But I want you to know our own elected officials, Congressman John Duncan, Senator Howard Baker, Senator Jim Sasser, pulled some of the most unethical and illegal and deceitful tricks in the Washington that's hard to swallow what they did. With it being dead, and once it's a law, there will be no dam. You can't add that to an amendment. but they did. And if it's not caught within so much of a period of time, it rides through. It's called House Rule 21. And it wasn't caught until too late, so it stood. They put the darter, Duncan did it in the House. They slid it in on some water appropriations bill, and then he gets up and tells them not to read it. So it's a voice vote. These people that are voting don't know they're voting on the Tellico Dam. So it gets through and they don't even know they voted for it. So he does it for the House, and then Baker does it first, I think, for the Senate. They vote it down. Sasser goes back in and does it again, and then the darter's holding his own, but then Baker goes around and twists arms. It's time for you to pull in a favor, and he gets so many people to flip their votes. And so now this bill goes to President Jimmy Carter. And we prayed for a veto. One of Mama's last trips to Washington was on the 24th because it was going to be on his desk on the 25th. So she and Beulah Davis went up and they tried to touch base with as many senators as they could that had insight to Carter that would promote a veto. But that did not happen, and he refused to veto, and when he did, he signed the death warrant for the Little Tennessee River and any dash of hopes for us to save our farm. So, the day after Carter refused to do this veto, all of us mad farmers collected and made signs, and we went to downtown Knoxville. We had petitions. We wanted our land back. Remember, there's that 22,000 extra acres they've got. These signs are in Mary Ann's barn. Those are the original. We stuck them on everybody's tractors, different ones. They had different slogans. And we went to a tobacco warehouse and they let us unload. And we drove right up to the TVA towers with our trucks and our tractors. And so the same tractors that farmed the land that we tried to save were still trying to help us up there in Washington, up there. And while we were doing this, here's Mama. She had one of those beauty sashes on right here that says, "Carter betrayed us." And Mama was a hand talker, and she wore this little cap everywhere, and she's a laying down the law. So while we're up there trying to make a point, here we have a picture. Down here is Tellico. Now this is the only concrete section right in here. This is all earthen. Earthen. The water would be back in here. This is what's left of Bustle Island, one of the richest islands, one of the, like DeSoto, some of those settlers, some of the Cherokee, this was very rich. And then here you have Fort Loudon. And then this was the bridge. They've since taken the car bridge down and built a new bridge over down in here somewhere. And then the Tellico was supposed to join Fort Loudon somewhere over here, right here. Well, no, that wasn't it. They clear cut. This is what we lived with, and they burned, and they scraped the river. This is at Jackson Bend, and then this is the parkway that went through the backside of our farm. You didn't need to see that one yet. So while we were up there still fighting, TVA goes back to work. So the farmers had failed. The darter had failed. Not really. The politicians failed the darter. So our last hopes were now with the Cherokee up at Chota. And this is a group, Gary Breedlove and friends. They were from Newport. And they sang this song, "Damn the TVA, save the little T. Why can't they see what that river means to me?" And I can't sing, but I've got the words in the book. This was on October the 20th, and we tried to support the Cherokee the best we could because we were handed a third eviction deadline. We'd lived through two, and we were to leave by November the 9th. That date came and went, and we didn't budge. People go, "What in the world? Where was your thinking cap?" We didn't leave. We hadn't left the other two, and we weren't going to leave this one either. There were 3 families that held on for the whole 20-year period, and that was McCall's and Mosier, Earl Mosier, and the Ritcheys. And so none of us left. We all stayed. So there were no legal options for us to really turn to. since the president had given clout to TVA's decision to build it. So there we were. We had nowhere to go, between a rock and a hard place. It was like, what rat hole do we want to go down? And a rat hole is what it ended up being. It was let TVA come in and move everything you have, from your tobacco curing in the barn, to your hay, to your cattle, to your spoon drawer, to your scrap iron around the old sour john tree. Everything, the combine, the tractor, the truck, your dogs. And they would put it somewhere for 30 days in an undisclosed place. You couldn't go check on it. You couldn't go look at it or move yourself. Now, Daddy had rented the bacon farm on those big old bacon bottoms, and that was below the 813 flood line. Our crops weren't ready. They weren't mature. If they took the combine, then we couldn't harvest. And TVA was threatening to, they wanted that dam so bad, they were threatening to just flood. And they did flood about 200 acres of farmland crops that they didn't get out. The farmer didn't get out, they just were flooded. And so we had invested money, and we wanted our money back because that was our livelihood. So Daddy made the decision that we would, that's part of the Cherokee, the sites. I should have shown that shows the historical sites that were going to be covered up, and rich they were. And so we left, started moving on the 11th. Our lawyer came down and said, we don't have a legal term now. He'd had a card up his sleeve about something that was going on in North Carolina, and it fell through. And he says, we don't have any other alternatives. You have to make your decision today. So we started our move on November the 11th. Now, Burl Mosier and Miss Nell McCall decided that this is the federal marshal, Harry Mansfield, that carried out Burl Mosier and Nell McCall's evictions. And they made the TVA come in, and they took all their things away for 30 days. Miss Nell was in her 70s. Her husband had died. She didn't have any farm equipment. She was already leasing the farm to a local boy. And Burl had 5 acres in his house, and he was a mail carrier in Bullitt County, so he had a federal job. And so they took their things. They made a point for them to do that. So on the 17th, this is a beautiful picture. See this right here? That is the bridge at Vonore that crosses the Little T. This is Rose Island. Have you ever heard of the Cherokee Dragon Canoe? Dragon Canoe lived at one time here. Their farm was on the back side. This is Asa and Nell. Asa died Sunday morning. It was Easter Sunday morning of 1977. And she was a feisty little critter. And here they are. Every dog he ever had, he named it Bowser. What's that dog's name? Bowser. What's that one? Bowser. Oh, they're all Bowser. And this is an aerial view of their home. And you can see all of the stuff that came in to move them out. And this was on the 13th. This is Burl. Burl was bitter till the very end. And this was his home. And this is his home being torn down. And this is that federal marshal right here watching the whole thing. And so that was a very difficult, hard time to fight so hard and know you won, but you didn't get the result that you won. You got something else. So on the 17th, the day after we got everything moved up about a half a mile up the road, our cattle went to one farm, our equipment went to another, and our household stuff went to the Rogers house about half a mile. Here we are in Vonore, and this is Mama, this is me, Sally, and Mary Ann. This is Jan Petrie. Y'all ever remember her? She was Channel 6, I think, at the time. And here we are, Mama, me, and Sally, and Burl's brother-in-law, I don't know that lady. And we're protesting in Vonore because the TVA board are down there telling them how much money they're going to funnel. So we made sort of like a little walkway, and they had to walk by us, but that's holding our signs. So they might not, we didn't get our way, but we still had plenty to say. And so while we were doing that, then Daddy and Randy got to go back and get this land crops that were under the 813. This is Jackson Bend right here, and this is an island today because that part, the high part's not underwater. And this is my brother down here, And there they are. A group from Memphis came, and they had him stopped. They wanted to get right in the reel. And so that's Daddy on the right, and that's a hustle to get out the farm crops. So 11 days after we walked off the farm, on November the 27th, Mama happens to drive by, and she sees our house, which is here. You can see this is the tree my brother and I used to climb. We called it a tree house, but it wasn't. This is that same tree. She drives by, and TVA's already started knocking it down. She flies up to the house we're staying in and gets those little Instamatic cameras, because that's all we had. And she comes back, and I don't know how she kept her hands steady, but she took pictures. And they never would look at her. They kept their backs to her the whole time. So you can see them knocking everything we tried to save just down and burying it. You can see, I don't know how she did that. So then, let's see, you need to see this next one? No, you don't need to see that one yet. Mama writes our lawyer shortly after that. This will be the last one that I'll read to you. She writes to Boone, our lawyer. Our house, barns, and well were crushed and buried Tuesday of this week. I guess the place is purified now, that all signs of the squatters have been crumbled and buried under the sod for all eternity. But as long as we live, any one of the 6 of us, that place will always be special, and a good portion of our lives and our memories will forever remain there. Using eminent domain to reshuffle the habitants of an area seems totally unjust. We're not qualified to live there according to TVA rules, so we were dispensed for more favorable TVA-approved and screened tenants. This is social maneuvering at its worst, and to think our own stupid congressman encouraged and condoned TVA in this endeavor makes it all even harder to accept. I haven't so far, and probably never will. She writes that. So the River Valley died 2 days later, on the 29th. It was 45 years this past November, so now we're marching towards 46. We placed this in the newspaper on the 30th anniversary of the river's death. And you can see here that here is the dam. And then this is what was left of Russell Island. This is flowing into the Big Tennessee, which is really Watts Bar Reservoir. And then this is the backup, and you can see how the river swirled around. So the flood starts. And then you can see in this picture, this is the bacon bottoms that Daddy had rented. And you can see these are soybeans. This is that same field from that same advantage. This is an antenna on the truck. You can see how it's flooding that. It was very difficult. And then this was what we called home, Jackson. And you can begin to see a little bit of the river is coming up through here. All of this is underwater today. And then you can see January the 19th, 1980, Teleco joined Fort Loudon, and they broke this, and the water's connected. So TVA was unable to lure any kind of development, any kind of industry. So they had to create something called the Teleco Reservoir Development Agency, which is still intact today for that specific purpose. And they had a so-called auction. Well, this was published like maybe the week of. This was the day after Thanksgiving. And so they didn't give anybody any notice. So we were there. We handed out protest papers. It's in the book. And they would not allow anybody to buy, even though it's touted as a public sale. It went as an 11,000 acre block. Well, who can afford 11,000 acres? So Teleco land was handed over to TRDA. It was the biggest land sale in Tennessee history. So after our federal eviction in '79, I want you to know we paid money yearly to TVA, then to TRDA, to farm our old farm after we had moved to the edge of Monroe County. So we paid Cooper Community until Cooper Communities came in, and they finally lured somebody in, and that was in '86. So we farmed our farm through 1985, and we had to tell the farm goodbye again. So it was another goodbye. So our farm today is not underwater. It's jammed with houses and roads, and it's crisscrossed with the fields that once grew corn and wheat and oats, and that we romped and went out to get Starry the milk cow, and it supported a family of 6. Now people from all over live there, and they have no idea of what it was like. A driving conviction pushed me to write this book. I tried to get Mama, as I said earlier, to write it. She would have nothing to do with it. But it came to life, and over a period of 14 years, not continual work, because there were three family deaths: my husband, my mother, and my sister. And there was sicknesses that went along with all that. So it was like this was shoved to the side. But it was always on the edge of my kitchen table, and it became a live being. And it would growl at me, and I'd say, oh, I can't deal with you today. And I'd talk to it just like it was alive. And I'd say, I can't deal with you today. And then there were days I'd sit down and I'd write, and I erased, I don't know how many erasers I went through, but I thought, this little Dickens over here said, you can't write a book, you don't even know where to put a semicolon. And this one would go, but if you don't do it, who's going to do it? Because Marianne had already told me she wasn't going to do it. And I know my brother, the farmer, wasn't going to do it. And see, there was no Mosers left. There are no heirs. There are no McCalls. They can't tell their story. There's only 3 live people, me and Marianne and my brother. And I thought, by doggies, I'm going to write it if it goes in a 3-ring notebook. So it all fell together, and it did get published. I had to self-publish it because a real publisher wouldn't have put in there what I've got in there. And so it came to life. I had too much stuff to just let it die. It would have gone in a box somewhere, and the next generation would go, oh, that's that old stuff, let's just throw it away. Nobody cares about that stuff. And so it's a story from the middle of the storm out. The other stories are from the out looking in. But this is from us standing there, working, fighting, and it's honest, and it's sincere, and it's the only publication of its kind because it's the only one that tells the story from a farmer's voice from the inside. And there'll not be another one. I can pretty much just stand here and tell you. There won't be anybody else write one about the Tellico Dam story from a farmer's perspective. I mean, the farmer's voice has been dead now all these 45 plus years. And now they do have a voice, but you got to remember, we're just one of the 348 plus farm families. Every one of those farmers had a different story, and they had their own that will probably never get written. So I'd like to say Paul Harvey might say, this is the rest of the story. And so I want you to know we did fight a clean fight, and TVA did not. They used their propaganda and their influence and their power and their money. And so I would like to I know I've gone way over my time. Poor Mr. Rick's being nice to me, and y'all are being nice. Nobody got left. Thank you. But we'll go down. We remember all that was lost. If you're at Chilhowie and you've ever seen those stanchions, I call them stanchions, I don't know, pillars. That was from the Babcock Lumber Company when they lumbered out Babcock, in Jeffries Hill in Monroe County. They brought that was a railroad trestle. You can see here, it's still there. We're coming down the river. Here's Chota. This is the picture that was in the True Gentleman's Magazine. That was when Douglas was here. That's Carson Island. Isn't that a beautiful picture? I mean, aren't these gorgeous? This is Fort Loudon before it had to be moved. If it still hadn't been moved, it wouldn't have been saved. And this is iconic because it has the old bridge and the new bridge. This is 411. And then it has the old and the new railroad bridges before they were torn down. I thought that was a neat picture. This is Rose Island, and this is where Dragon Canoe was, and this is also where the largest pine tree seedling nursery in the southeast was for a long time. They used to haul these pine seedlings and all those little pine trees down there in North Georgia. They were born right here on Rose Island and hauled out in refrigerated trucks. That's a whole historical section. That is Ware's Bend, which was all taken and has not been developed, and a farmer has been farming that, Don Bailey, all these years. And then we're back to Jackson Bend, and there you've already seen that pretty land. That was the Appleby farm. That was the Sandman. They had a sand dredge. This is the old drag strip there at Loudon. This was Davis Ferry that crossed the river, and then this is just a beautiful view of the area. Now the whole project and the fight did take its toll on Mom and Daddy. Just look at them, that makes me want to cry. And so, but we remember everything, and we know that we did everything we could do. We stood on principle. So we don't really have any regrets about what we did. We can't say, oh, I wished we'd have stood and fought. We didn't listen to TDA's henchmen. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking your time today to come. Thank you. Do you have any questions, or Rick's going to run me out on a pole?
Now, if
Because I
anybody does have
taken.
any questions, Carolyn, if you're willing.
Oh, I'm willing.
Carolyn, let me just say thank you so much. I've heard you before. It's a very well told, horrible story. Buy the book.
Oh,
Read the book.
that's very good.
I'm going to reread it. It's incredible.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you. I do have some, but please don't feel like you got to buy it. It won't hurt my feelings at all.
Carolyn, too, you said this. People are still talking about this. They're going to have a meeting in Tellico Village. Would you talk about that, please?
There was a fella in Tellico Village that just accidentally bought it on Amazon. And in the back, there's a way you can contact me. And he wrote a very nice review on Amazon. And then he wrote me and he says, I want to know more. I'm amazed. And he says at the detail. So he wanted to take us out to some place to eat. And I thought, I said, how would you like to have a tour? So Marianne and I went out and we took a 3-hour tour with that man, and we never left Tellico Village. And we took him to show him old roads, where this building was, where that house was, where this farm was. And he took notes, and he says, I'm going to do a presentation for the New Villagers Club, which apparently is a club out there that you belong to for 2 years or less. And he says, there's over 700 people in this club. I said, there's 700 new people out there? He said, yes. He says, I'm going to rent the yacht club on February the 15th. And he says, it's open to these people for 150. And he says, we're going to co-present this. And so we're still working on that presentation. That's a piece of work. So I've had some very nice compliments on Amazon. So I do have some hardback covers. They're $45, and then this is $30, and it's the softback book. And I have them signed, and I have bookmarks, so you won't get lost in there. So again, this is a vintage. I used to wear this. This was a bumper sticker that we had. This is a original TVA map when we were there, like for, I think it'd been 30 years. Zig Plotter is the one that fought it in the Tellico.
And talk about that. Let's come back up.
Well, maybe you can help me with that. There has been a professor at Yale University, a Dr. Near, N-E-A-R, who has done this so-called study. And by the way, it was partially funded by TVA. That's what I've been told. That's what he told me. And they're claiming that Dr. Etnier, who found the darter and put it on the endangered species list, that it was just sort of like a figment of the imagination. It never really existed, or it was a fish of something, a little darter of something else. It just never, it was a nothing. And so he's trying to, what I call, rewrite history.
And
maybe you can add to that.
Well, you told it very well. And TVA made an agreement with the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians. They were going to give property back, including Chota and Tanasi in the Sequoia Birthplace Museum 40 years ago, and haven't lived up to that. And there's still an effort going on for that. We're going to talk to the TVA board in February to see if we can't get some justice done in this situation.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that when those 5 things I was telling you what they did to try to control the project, when the Oklahoma band were going to join the Eastern band, when they were going to join together to fight for the river and the archaeological and historical sites for the Cherokee, Aubrey Wagner contacts the Oklahoma band and says, why don't y'all just fly out here and I'll give you all this great old big grand tour. Oh, we're not doing anything. We're protecting everything. And the Cherokee say, oh, we don't have that kind of fund in our budget. And he says, oh, doesn't matter, we'll fly you out. So TVA flies a congregation of them out there, smoozes them around. I don't know what is said, but within a month's time, the Oklahoma band pulls any resistance to join the Eastern band. And to seal the deal, Aubrey Wagner hires one of that group that came. This man's white, married to a Cherokee, and he plants him, and he is a spy, and he is supposed to report to TVA any movements that the Eastern band is pulling up together to fight. And so he uses him as a spy. Now, how dirty, I mean, to think, that's just one incident. Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Was there any research done about financial gain to certain politicians or? I mean, I'm not saying specific ones, but I'm just curious if there was a trail of follow the money as such after this many years.
Well, I don't know. I haven't I haven't even, well, we always thought that they were all given lots out there at Tellico Village.
Well,
Or
okay,
Rarity
well, I guess
Bay.
maybe that's what
Or Rarity Bay. Or-
financial gain property would be one of the.
Yeah, so, yeah. We know Lynn Sieber had 2 lots out there because one didn't give him much room. You know, he wanted some space. And we knew the person that lived by them, and they said he didn't want anybody, you know, close to him. So I'm sure there's a money trail. We always thought there was, and we never could figure out why Mayor Charles Hall of Tellico Plains was such a pusher. And I don't know how I got the name Tellico, because when you mention Tellico, it's like, that's always Tellico Plains. That should have been named something else, not Tellico. I never did agree with that, but they didn't ask me, so, you know, there's that. And I do have some samples in this book of Mama's handwriting. Her letters are all in pencil, and I've had to decipher those, and then these are some, feel free to come up and look at anything you want to look at. Again, I can't thank you enough for being here and for your time.